Well, thank you very much for that incredibly warm welcome. There is at least one advantage in being the last speaker. I know that you're all here to listen to me. You may be exhausted, but you're here to listen to me. So when Richard said to me, Ben, will you be our Brexit spokesman? I thought, oh, Brexit. Aren't people sick of Brexit? And he said, no, the arguments need to be made. Do you remember everyone was accusing the nation of being Brexhausted in the 2019 general election? Well, they may have been Brexhausted, but what a price we paid for that exhaustion. Because we gave an 80-seat majority to someone who promised to deliver Brexit. And at its heart, what is Brexit? Brexit is the United Kingdom taking its rightful place amongst the 168 other countries in the world that are not a member of the EU. It is not a remarkable situation. It is the default position that a country has. But we're constantly told, and it seems our political class has bought this or perpetrated the myth, that the United Kingdom can't survive outside the European Union, that the other 168 countries that we've now joined must be in a dire state, not being members of the EU. And I think we've made one massive mistake as Brexiteers, and the mistake is this. We've allowed Remainers and Rejoiners to force us to justify Brexit. We don't have to justify Brexit. Brexit is what it means to be the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. What Remainers and Rejoiners have to prove is that we should go back into that arrangement. But they make no case for the EU. They just threaten us and bully us and tell us that weren't we stupid for voting for an independent country. I will agree with one thing that they say, and that is that the country has been badly managed, but that's got absolutely nothing to do with Brexit. What that's got to do with is a parliamentary party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party, who had an 80-seat majority, and instead of jettisoning the socialist, malign entity that is the EU, it sidled up to it. It didn't ditch the socialism of the EU. It didn't inculcate aspiration. It inculcated dependency. It didn't deregulate and cut taxes for growth. It just perpetrated wealth redistribution. It even gave up part of the country, as you saw me describing earlier, which is perhaps the biggest act of constitutional self-harm any of us in this room have experienced in our lifetimes. So Brexit is blameless. Brexit cannot fail. Brexit is us governing ourselves. Sure, the Tory party has failed, but you know what I want to do to the Tory party. And we are going to do it, and we're going to take back control. How is it that we somehow accept the settled argument that French boats can come into our waters, take whatever damn fish they want, completely unpoliced, electrify 1 square mile of water underneath their boats, or dredge up the seabed, destroying our eco-environment, our marine eco-environment, perhaps the most sustainable resource this country has, and we just sit back and do nothing. We're not even allowed to take their illegal migrants that they send us through their waters back to their shores. They can send their boats in, nick our fish, but we can't send back the illegal migrants. We've given up on this country. I say we, the political class has given up on this country. And Labour is just as bad as the Conservatives. If you want change, ladies and gentlemen, you don't rail against Brexit. Brexit has enabled us to give effect to change, and that change has to come by evicting the Conservatives from office. I do like Suella. I think she speaks an enormous amount of sense. As I said earlier, I thought it was an incredibly brave speech from a member of the cabinet. But she is short on action. Nigel was absolutely right. She's diagnosed the problem. That in itself is a good start. But we now need a solution. What is the solution to border control? Can anyone tell me what we have to do to control our borders? Come on, tell me, what do we have to do? Well, what we don't do is wait for them to come here so that we have all the legal difficulties in deporting them. Border control is a physical process. Remember when we used to have a navy that protected the United Kingdom? This is, as Suella said, an assault on our nationhood. But we haven't deployed the navy. Border Force is a glorified taxi service. They should all be sacked. The RNLI, the RNLI. We go on about the people smugglers. The RNLI are going into French waters, taking people who are perfectly safe on a dinghy, putting them on their boats, affording them instant protection under our law, and then bringing them back to our shores where we promptly pay £50,000 a year per head in order to look after them. £4 billion last year we paid on housing, caring, and providing medical needs for the 100,000 odd illegal migrants that are in the UK. And the problem's only going to get worse. So until Suella actually understands what needs to be done, this is going to go on. We need border control, not deportation. But of course, we do need to leave the ECHR. As Nigel so well put it, it's morphed from the admirable organization that was set up to keep the French and the Germans from ripping each other apart, and it's become anti-human rights. It now delivers judgments that prevents nation states from being nation states. And that's what's at stake here, ladies and gentlemen. This assault on the United Kingdom, both legal migration and illegal migration, is an attack on our nation state. It's nothing short of that. Suella called that right. And that it's not the only attack that's coming on our nation state. Our nation state is being attacked daily. We're told that our heritage is as of slave traders. They never mention the fact that we were the first country in history ever, at the peak of its power, to abolish the slave trade, and then spend the rest of the 19th century spend the rest of the 19th century policing the high seas to make sure that people didn't trade in slaves. They tell us that Winston Churchill, on whose shoulders we all stand, without whom we would not be in this room as free people, we're told by St. Paul's Cathedral, the Archbishop of Welby, that he was a white supremacist. On which planet did Winston Churchill become a white supremacist? I'll tell you why they tell us that. I'll tell you why they destroy our aspiration and create dependency. It's to destroy our self-confidence. It's another attack on the nation state. They don't want you proud. They don't want you self-confident. They want an EU morass, a blob that are easy to govern. That's why we have 6.2 million people now, twice as many as before the pandemic, on universal credit. There were 1 million people on universal credit in 2018. There are 6.2 million now. Some of them are working. That is a broken labor force. 2.5 million of those aren't even looking for a job. So when the Prime Minister gets up and says unemployment is at a record low, he's lying. Unemployment is only technically at a record low because they don't measure the people who aren't looking for a job. And how do they fix the problem of the labor market? Again, migration. And if you want to undermine a nation state, what better way to do it than to have unbridled migration of different cultures. So that, what is a nation state? It's a shared culture, it's a shared history, it's a shared language. But if you take on lots of people, and we've had more migration in the last 25 years than we had in all of history up until that point in time, another thing Suella recognized, if you do that, you undermine the nation state. That's what they're doing. The EU doesn't want a nation state. I was speaking in Rome. I'm just darting all over the place, but I'm painting a picture, I hope. I was speaking in Rome last weekend at something called at a conference given by the Nazioni Futura party. Does anyone know the Nazioni Futura? Well, if you read about them on Wikipedia, they'll come across to you as, they will be described as extreme right-wing. I thought, should I really be associated with an extreme right-wing Italian party? I thought, well, what the hell, I'll go along and speak anyway. And I was absolutely stunned. You would think that an extreme right-wing party would be very proud of Italy, wouldn't you? You'd think that an extreme right-wing party would at the very least understand the importance of a settled Italian state. All the speeches were appealing to the EU for a solution to the migration problem. The EU, an entity which has allowed freedom of movement, an entity which has literally removed borders from within Europe, so when people land in Italy, the Western Balkans or Greece, they can just walk straight up to Calais, get on a dinghy, apparently with French assistance and British money, and come across here to take advantage of our generosity. This is all an attack on the nation state. And you see that playing out in our economics. If you think the culture war is limited to what Lawrence Fox fights, less so now since he's been detained, but if you think it's limited to specific factions of our history, our culture, our heritage, our language, I haven't talked about the attack on language, but our language is under attack, another very key way to undermine a nation state. But if you think it's limited to these silos, you're wrong. There's an all-out economic attack on the United Kingdom, and we're perpetrating it ourselves. One dimension of that is this inexorable, ridiculous march towards net zero. It is... The Chancellor of the Exchequer will tell you that he won't cut your taxes because that would be inflationary. What he doesn't tell you is the most inflationary government policy there is net zero. It is ridiculous. And even though he's going to allow us, so kind of him, to have gas boilers after 2030 and to drive our fossil fuel cars until 2035, what he doesn't tell you is that all the regulations that are in place to penalize you for buying gas boilers and for buying internal combustion engine cars until that period, and through to 2030, all those regulations remain in place. So you will find, as we head towards 2030, the cost of gas boilers going up. You will find the cost of internal combustion engines going up in price. And that's because of net zero policies which have not been removed. Sure, the deadline's been removed, but the regulations haven't. It is a deeply, deeply damaging policy. The other major cultural impact on our economics, which is eating into our pockets and the prosperity of this country, is diversity, equality, and inclusion. Anyone who works in any business now would have been touched by it adversely. There is no positive side to DEI. There is nothing good about it. There can be nothing good in businesses being required to promote ethnic minorities. There can be nothing good for businesses in being required to promote sexual minority preferences. There can be nothing good for business in getting them to recognize that there are 72 genders. The only thing that matters in business is that you make a profit, that you employ your employees and you care for them, you pay your taxes, and you pay dividends to your shareholders. Those are the 4 obligations that the Companies Act used to require us to uphold. But if you remove meritocracy, which is what DEI does, and you introduce this nebulous other entity at the table, which we're all nodding to, taking the knee to, you are damaging the economy. And if you damage the economy, it's all of us in this room and everyone in the United Kingdom that's being damaged. And all these policies that I've touched on, all of them come from the EU. The most important thing we need to do, and Kemi Badenoch has got this so wrong, is ditch those EU regulations. That will not create, I don't know if you heard, she said that will create a legislative vacuum. There's no such thing as a legislative vacuum. We live under common law in this country. Everything is permitted unless it's expressly prohibited. The reason the EU is such a basket case of an economy and will never succeed as an economy is because nothing is permitted unless it's expressly permitted. It needs the laws. It needs legislation because they're not allowed to do anything without legislation. We, in the United Kingdom, are entrepreneurial. Our history is in small and medium-sized businesses. Our history is in being nimble, independent, trading businesses and as a country. And this legislative weight is another massive damaging impact on the economy. So when Remainers and Rejoiners say to you, Brexit has done such damage, what I say back to them is to promote us to the EU, to promote EU values, to want to take us back into the EU is anti-British. And it's deeply anti-democratic. It's anti-democratic, it's anti-British, it's deeply damaging to our economic ecosystem, deeply damaging to our cultural makeup, our language, our history, our heritage, and ultimately, it's deeply damaging to our self-confidence. And that's what we mustn't ever allow to happen. We have to keep fighting. But voting the same way as we've always voted will just give us more of the same. So as Anne said, I think Anne is still here somewhere. She's short, but I can see her. She's just about shorter than me. As Anne said, if you keep voting for the same thing, you'll get the same result. You have to vote for change. And there's frankly only one party that can really challenge the main 2 parties. It's not the Liberal Democrats. It's Reform UK. Reform UK is going to make the British lion roar again. Reform UK is going to take Northern Ireland back into the Union with Great Britain. Reform UK will stop the boats. Reform UK will make you proud to be British, unashamedly proud. And my last message to you, if I may, is don't just leave this conference and think, wow, that was good fun, or that was dreadful, whatever you might think. If you believe this, if you believe in this country, if you believe in the nation state, if you believe our language is important, our culture is important, our history is important, you can't just go home and let this rest. You've got to go home, and each of you should make a pledge to yourself to find 5 people to whom you pass this message and require them in turn to find another 5 and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make the United Kingdom great again. Thank you.